Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the Season 3 premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It was a 2-episode premiere, and the first episode was called Hegemony Part 2. And as the episode starts, right in the middle of the crisis that it left off with at the end of last season's finale, with the advice of the bridge crew, Captain Pike implements a plan to ram a Gorn ship so that they can tag it with a dead torpedo for purposes of tracking it, to give them a chance to retreat and then go back to rescue the crew members and colonists that are stranded on that ship after having been captured by the Gorn. Meanwhile, Captain Batel is undergoing treatment in sickbay to try to rid her of her Gorn fetus infestation, but there's a complication because it turns out she's allergic to the substance that they would need to use in order to prep her to be in stasis to forestall the progression of the infection. At the same time, Pike argues with Admiral April about the Admiral's reluctance to provoke the Gorn, resulting in the Admiral giving him unofficial permission to do what needs to be done to rescue the people that the Gorn have taken, and Scotty struggles to complete the construction of a device that would trick the Gorn into thinking that the Enterprise is one of their ships. We see La'an wake up on a Gorn ship in some type of embryonic sac, or some such thing, before rescuing the Doctor, Sam Kirk, and Ortegas, at which point she decides that they're going to free everyone who is trapped there who hasn't already died before they escape. Back on the Enterprise, with Scotty's device patched into the system, the Enterprise crosses into enemy territory, and at first seems to go unnoticed. In sickbay, in the middle of helping Nurse Chapel try to figure out what to do about Captain Batel's condition, Spock decides to bring up his relationship situation with Chapel before the two of them decide to use Illyrian blood to try to improve the captain's chances of surviving a surgery to remove her infestation, despite the fact that it would be against the regulations. Meanwhile, back on the enemy ship, the captive crew attempt to free other captives. With Captain Batel's condition worsening, Spock and Nurse Chapel decide to try what's going to be a risky surgery, even though they used Una's Illyrian blood, because it has at least some chance of survival, where no other procedure they simulated came back with any chance of survival. Meanwhile, it seems that the Gorn are launching a full-scale invasion of Federation space, and the Enterprise has to leave behind the captive colonists and crew members once again in order to get into range to warn Starfleet. Captain Pike decides to run a risky experiment with the Enterprise itself to make it behave as though it itself is a star in order to try to trigger the Gorn collective to go to sleep. As that's happening, the abducted crew are still trying to rescue the others, and they end up coming into conflict with the Gorn before commandeering a small Gorn ship within the big ship, which they fly out of the ship while other Gorn ships pursue. Enterprise succeeds at getting the Gorn to go into hibernation and at rescuing the crew and the colonists. Captain Pike goes to visit Captain Batel in sickbay, and he kneels to pray at her bedside as she wakes up, and he tells her about how they saved her. And that's where the first episode of the 2 ended. So I really, really liked this episode. I thought that they did a great job of keeping everything moving at a really fast pace, which, just sort of builds tension because it's just happening so fast, and the crew has to adapt quickly and problem solve quickly and try to outmaneuver the enemy under pressure. And that included, Scotty trying to build his little machine. So I thought they just did a great job with that, and that, the dramatic writing was excellent. And, they did the same thing with the Captain Batel plot, where they were against the clock because they couldn't put her in stasis, and they had to find a way to keep her from dying. And so that was another dramatic, plot line in the episode, and I thought it was well done. You felt the urgency that Nurse Chapel and Spock were dealing with. And so I thought it was really well done. I thought that Anson Mount did a fantastic acting job in this episode. I mean, he's good, right? But in this episode, I thought he really, really knocked it out of the park. He just blew me away acting-wise in this episode, as did really Ethan Peck and, young Miss Bush. She did great as Nurse Chapel in this episode. I think my favorite moment of the episode was when Pike, who's desperate not to lose Captain Batel, goes to her bedside after she's come through surgery and is, on the mend, but still not out of the woods. And he's just so desperate not to lose her that he catches himself in a moment of, sort of saying to himself, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to do this. And he speaks out loud to, I guess, the spirit of his dead father or whatever, and says, okay, Dad, you win. And as he's kneeling, in that moment, I remembered that his father was a preacher and that he was about to pray. And I am a staunch atheist, but I grew up Catholic. And so, I get that because there are things that occur in my own life that just make me desperate for them to not go a certain way or to go a certain other way. And you want so badly for there to be a supernatural power that can help you, that even as a staunch atheist of some 30 years or 40 years now, you still get that urge to sort of appeal to a divine entity. And I don't, but I understand the urge. I felt what he was feeling in that moment because I felt it before. And I just thought it was brilliant writing and a brilliant character moment. And I found it a little bit moving. And I thought, because he was so good with the acting in this episode that he totally sold it. And I totally believed that he was in that moment. And I understood exactly what that moment meant for him because I've been there. And I thought it was excellent. So I really liked this episode. Another thing I liked about it was the scenes on the Gorn ship with the crew that was trying to escape. I thought they gave, those characters some great moments and well-deserved moments. So I really enjoyed this episode all the way around. Now, there are a couple of things about it that I noticed that kind of annoyed me. And the first one occurs right at the beginning of the episode. And I noticed it right away. And I noticed it because of things that Paramount Plus did, A, in the way of promoting the new season, and B, in the way of recapping people on the end of last season as the episode started. Some time ago, they showed a clip of this first episode in which Captain Pike starts to formulate a plan on how to deal with the impending situation that they were in at the end of the last episode of the first season. And so he says, Uhura, repeat back Admiral April's orders. And she says, you have to withdraw. And he says, but he didn't say immediately, right? So we can do this thing first. So that was part of the clip that they showed some time ago. And when the episode starts in earnest and you go through that moment again, just as it's about to happen, you remember, hey, I've seen this before, and he's about to say that he didn't say immediately because you already know it's coming. And so that part where he says that is now in your brain because you've seen it twice. The thing is that right before the episode began in earnest, they recapped the end of the first episode, and you hear Uhura tell Pike that Captain April has ordered their retreat, and she does in fact say immediate retreat. So at the end of the second episode, just before they cut to the cliffhanger, she says, Captain Pike, Admiral April has ordered our immediate withdrawal. And then in what is supposed to be the very next moment or so, he says, Uhura, repeat back the order. We have to withdraw. And then he goes, but he didn't say immediately, except he did. And Uhura knows that. So I was immediately like, wait a minute. He did say immediately. Now, had they not shown that moment before the episode came out, or alternatively, had they not, and this is probably the bigger issue, recapped the end of the second episode, I wouldn't have picked up on it. But they did. And so it was like, really? She just said, we just heard it. So yeah, they should have, I don't know, paid better attention to the continuity there. Another thing they did in this episode that was silly is something that I did not actually notice. I only know about it because I watched a review of this episode on the Nitpicking Nerd channel. And the Nitpicking Nerd picked up on something that I really should have caught that's kind of silly, and that is the issue of the transporter in sickbay, but really it's transporters in general, right? They exist in Star Trek, so whether it's one in sickbay or not doesn't matter, because both Nurse Chapel and Spock should know that Dr. Mbenga, for a period of time, had kept his daughter from dying of an incurable disease by basically freezing her in time by means of the transporter. He stored her pattern in the transporter pattern buffer in sickbay, the way Scotty did in the episode Relics on TNG. And so the issue becomes, why didn't they store her pattern in the buffer to keep time from passing for her and essentially put her in stasis without putting her in medical stasis because she was allergic to the prep fluid or substance? Why didn't they do that? Now, if there's a reason they couldn't do it, fine, but write that into the script. But they didn't. So that bugged me once, a nitpicking nerd pointed it out. So kudos to him. And you should check out all his review videos. They're usually very excellent. Sometimes I think he's being a little too hard on things, but his heart and spirit are definitely in the right place, and he's definitely a true fan of Star Trek as well as other shows and films. And he does a really good job at catching things that don't make sense and that should be questioned, and that various powers that be over various franchises should really work on. So check him out.
There's one other thing that bugged me when I was watching this episode, but it's not specific to this episode. Here's the thing. There's no way after this episode that they can claim that it makes sense that Captain Kirk didn't know about the Gorn in the TOS episode where he fights the Gorn. I think it's called Arena. Various fans have made excuses for why he might not know about them because they're not saying anything directly in Strange New Worlds that would indicate that he definitely knew, but like from all the scenarios they're depicting where the crew and other Starfleet personnel keep encountering the Gorn in these big, huge ways. Like in this episode, there was a gigantic battle and an almost full-scale invasion of the Federation by the Gorn. There's no way Captain Kirk didn't know about this and hadn't heard of the Gorn. So it's just another one of those things where you go, what are they doing? Like, do they not care about canon, or is this show supposed to be in an alternate timeline and they're just not saying it? And it's really, really annoying.
But anyway, overall, I really, really loved the episode. The second episode was called Wedding Bell Blues. And as it starts with the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the Federation being 3 days away, the crew is preparing to have a centennial celebration for the purpose of improving morale, and Spock is trying to ready himself for Christine's return, part of which includes learning to dance, apparently, with La'an before he greets her upon her return in the transporter room with Dr. Kirby, who apparently is going to be staying in the same room with Christine and who will be her date to the centennial celebration, much to Spock's dismay. Simultaneously, Ortegas, having apparently fully physically recovered from her injuries at the hands of the Gorn, is fight training with her little brother, who is apparently a documentarian visiting the ship, and who's very impressed upon meeting her with Uhura as the training session ends. Captains Pike and Battelle share a little snog after discussing the fact that she's about ready to take her next command. Spock and Christine have an awkward conversation about the fact that she has a boyfriend, after telling him before she left for her sabbatical that she didn't want to be attached to anyone. Sometime later, Spock attends a cocktail gathering with Christine and Dr. Corby, who regale everyone with a romantic story about part of their time together, at Spock's behest, interestingly. When Spock then goes to the bar, he encounters what appears to him to be a Vulcan bartender, despite the fact that that's not actually who the person is, and then has himself a little drink before retiring to his quarters to go to sleep, only to then wake up next to Nurse Chapel, whom he is apparently now about to marry in some kind of altered reality situation. In this reality, the wedding coordinator is the same person from before who had impersonated a Vulcan, and he is now impersonating an Andorian, and Dr. Corby is Christine's best man instead of her boyfriend. As the machinations of the rehearsal for the wedding go on, Dr. Corby begins to notice that the fake Andorian is a bit of a trickster before sneaking into Spock's quarters, whereupon he explains to Spock that reality has changed, which, after punching Dr. Corby and waiting for him to recover, he realizes is true. He and Dr. Corby then try to explain to the captain what's happening, only to discover that the captain has organized Spock's bachelor party at his quarters, at which Scotty declares that he doesn't drink. Spock and Dr. Corby then confront the trickster, but he gets the better of Spock and coerces him into going through with the wedding. He even makes Dr. Corby, the maid of honor, under threat of vanishing him into a cornfield. As the wedding commences, however, Dr. Kirby objects, causing the entity to change him into a dog before Spock reads his vows, which are a massive declaration of love for Christine, and his declaration of love is so powerful that it wakes her up from the fake reality, which really upsets the entity, who begins to declare that he's going to kill everyone, at which point an orb-type entity shows up, which is apparently the entity's father, voiced by John Delancey, which is very interesting.
The reason, of course, that it's very interesting is because from the moment they first showed clips of this episode in the promotional material that they released for this season, people began to speculate whether the Rhys Darby character, the trickster that I'm talking about, was perhaps Trelane from the original series episode Squire of Gothos, or was he a Q? So fans were speculating. And they don't outright say which in the episode, which is very frustrating. If you go on IMDb and you look up Rhys' filmography, it says that he is playing Q/Trelane, which doesn't change the confusion at all. And then, if you go in John Delancey's, making it even more confusing, it says that he is playing Q on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Of course, there has been speculation for a very long time in the fandom that Trelane is a Q. So does his IMDb credit mean that they've confirmed that Trelane is a Q because they're saying he's a Q who's named Trelane? Or does it not mean that? And then John Delancey says he's Q. So it's just, oh man, like really, guys?
This entity scolds its son, the trickster, and makes him wake everyone up, at which point the crew tries to go back to what it was supposed to be doing. As such, they begin to celebrate Centennial Day, and everyone ends up dancing to Wake Me Up Before You Go Go by Wham, during which Lieutenant Ortegas leaves the party to go hit a heavy bag, and we see that she's apparently suffering from PTSD related to her experience with the Gorn as the episode ends. So I have mixed feelings about this episode. I liked it for a number of reasons. One of those is that Rhys Darby is excellent as the trickster entity in this episode. He just does a fantastic job. I liked his acting. I liked the character. The episode looked fantastic. I mean, from the costuming to the sets to the special effects, just everything looked fantastic. So it looked great. I thought that once again, there was top-notch acting from the regular cast. Ethan Peck was great. Miss Bush was great. And you really felt not only Spock's frustration, but hers, because, he's frustrated that she's with someone else because he's in love with her and he wants to be with her. And he knows that he can't because it wouldn't be right to sort of keep pursuing her and try to get her to change her mind about Dr. Corby. And you feel Christine's frustration because she doesn't want to hurt Spock. She cares for Spock. She doesn't want to hurt him, but the heart wants what the heart wants. And so she's frustrated. And it really came through in the acting. At the same time, I'm someone who has experience in his youth with unrequited love. I know it's unbelievable because just look at this, right? But I do. And I know how painful it is to be totally in love with someone and have to watch them be with someone else. And I can't imagine, or I can, having to do what Spock had to do, go through the motions of betrothing yourself to someone that you can't be with, and how much that must have hurt him. So I could really empathize with what he was going through, and I could sympathize with what she was going through because I have friends and I don't want to hurt them. So it just was really emotionally powerful. And so I really appreciated that. I appreciate these kinds of stories. It reminds me a lot of the plot line between Andrew Grimes and Keira Knightley in Love Actually, which just totally broke my heart when I saw it. That's one of my favorite movies. And part of it is for that storyline because I've been through that. So it was very similar to that, and I just like a story like that, even though it hurts to watch it. And so I just really liked this episode for all those reasons. Now, at the same time, I don't like at all what all of this means for Spock. I can buy that, he wasn't always the stoic Vulcan we first saw in the original series, and that in his younger years, he was a little more emotional. But first of all, the period of time between the end of this series and the beginning of the original series, where he's already that stoic guy, is a window of time that's really shortening. And so he's going to have to go through a very dramatic change in a short period of time. And I'm having trouble at this point believing that that can be accomplished believably. We'll have to see. Obviously, maybe they can accomplish it believably. But at this point, I'm not seeing how he can change from one, version to the next without like a ridiculously abrupt change just overnight. And that's not a realistic thing for most people. And so I'm concerned about where they're going and how they're going to get there. And that's only the case because he isn't just a little more emotional. He's very emotional. I mean, he doesn't behave emotionally in terms of his manner. He still carries himself, stiffly. And there's some reference to that in the script of this episode when he's dancing. He still behaves as almost robotically most of the time. And so it's not like he's laughing all the time or, experiencing fear or what have you. He's very even-keeled most of the time, but the emotions he feels for her run very deep. And everything about his relationship with her, and he even says that, by the way, in the script, and his, feelings about her are ever present at the top of his mind. And that's a problem for me because I think they're depicting him not as a little more emotional. And he is half human, so it's fine. But they're not depicting him as a little bit emotional in his younger years. They're depicting him as very emotional. And that would be fine if, as I said, the window of time between now and when he's going to be not that weren't so short and ever shortening as each episode airs. So I'm a little concerned about it. If they can make it work, and in the end, you can say, well, I understand that was the period of time where he was emotional, and this is how he came out of it and made the change, and it makes sense, then okay, well, that's just the way he was when he was younger. But I'm concerned that they're not going to get there in a way that's believable in the time they have left now, because don't forget, we know when the show is going to end. So that would be my only complaint about that episode. I thought the rest of it was fine. There again, I haven't seen the Nitpicking Nerds review of that episode yet, so I may learn some things that bother me, or learn of some things, I should say, that bother me. But at this point, that's the only thing. So, yeah, I think the season's off to a good start. I really do. I have my problems with the Spock thing, but maybe they'll work it out. Other than that, this episode was great in a lot of ways, and the prior episode was really, really great, except for a couple of small nitpicky things. So I think the season is off to a good start, and I hope the rest of the episodes are just as good. But that's really it, so I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.